Alright. Today we'll be discussing about emergency that was declared in India while Indira Gandhi was in power. And this has very much link with last year. If you remember, you have studied that there are certain rights which cannot be suspended during emergency. I did not explain what emergency is. I did not give you any example of what emergency was at that point. Today we'll see what actually happened, who declared emergency, and why the emergency was declared, and what happened after that. Very, very important chapter from everything's point of view, not political science point of view, for everything's point of view, for entire life, because you know what can be done, what cannot be done, what happened in emergency, what are your rights, what are your duties, what are your powers, everything you'll know in this class. And also we'll study about the conspiracy and the controversies both. So it was 12th of June 1975. Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha of Allahabad High Court passed a judgment declaring Indira Gandhi's election in the Lok Sabha as invalid, because if you remember, a lot of protest was going out throughout the country which made Indira Gandhi very much uncomfortable. The likes of Jai Prakash Narayan in the Bihar movement, then in Gujarat doing re-election, then Supreme Court controversies with Supreme Court. So Indira Gandhi was becoming very, very insecure with whatever was happening in the country. One after the one, dharna, strikes, lockdown, gheraos. To add some more, on 12th of June 1975, a judge named Jagmohan Lal Sinha, he was from Allahabad High Court, he passed a judgment, a very famous judgment. She declared the election of Indira Gandhi itself invalid. The Indira Gandhi का जो election हुआ वो invalid है. Imagine. A petition was filed in the court by Mr. Raj Narayan. He was a socialist leader and also a opposition leader also. He actually filed a petition in the Allahabad court, and finally, after looking into the matter, the Allahabad court gave a decision that Indira Gandhi's election was invalid. Now this was groundbreaking for the Congress. The judgment of the High Court meant that legally she was no more an MP, right? Because the judge said that, and court का फैसला आखिरी फैसला. The judgment of the High Court meant that she was legally no more an MP, and therefore, since she is no more an MP, she could not remain the Prime Minister unless there is a re-election, and unless she once again is elected as an MP within 6 months. मतलब जब order pass हुआ and she was removed from the MP post उनका जो है, within 6 months, if she does not win an election and she again does not become an MP, things are going to be very difficult for Indira Gandhi. On June 24th, 12 June 1975, Allahabad High Court ने order दिया. It gave an order that Indira Gandhi's election was invalid. After 12 days, that is June 24, they went to the Supreme Court. Naturally, High Court कुछ बोलेगा तो हम लोग कहाँ complaint file करेगा? We'll go to the Supreme Court. They went to the Supreme Court and Supreme Court looked into the matter and they gave a partial stay. Partial stay means स्थगित करके रखना, रखाई दिया, के दिन मानने कारणे रखाई दिया. तो Supreme Court gave a partial stay on the High Court order. बोलो High Court order के बारे में बाद में सोचेगा. For the time being, let it stay. We'll talk about it later. Fine. So she could remain as MP but could not take part in proceedings of Lok Sabha. वो MP तो थी but she could not take. Just 1 second please. नीना इंद्राणी नंबर আছে না? ওকে ফোন করো, তো ফোন করে বলো যে আমি ক্লাস অর্ডারটা একটু পরে পাঠাতে। আছে ফোন করে বলো মুখে দুধটা দিয়ে দিও না
ও খেয়েছে তো খালি ইন্দ্রাণী বলেছে
হ্যাঁ all right Aditya switch off your mic okay fine so the what we were discussing was we were talking about the emergency provisions and the judgment of the high court and the supreme court now crisis and response the stage was now set for a big political confrontation the stage was set for a big political confrontation इसका मतलब आप समझ सकते हो कि प्राइम मिनिस्टर को उसका पद से हटा दिया गया एमपी से हटते हटते बचा तो ऑब्वियसली कंसिडरिंग द बैकग्राउंड व्हाट हैपेंड विथ इंदिरा गांधी शी इज इनसिक्योर टू द पावर इन्फिनिटी नाउ right the opposition political parties led by Jayaprakash Narayan pressed for Indira Gandhi's resignation and organized a massive demonstration in Delhi's Ramlila ground on 25th June 1975 एक दिन बाद 12th of June 1975 what happened 12 June 19 year याद रखना on 12th of June 1975 12th of June Allahabad court gave a decision 12 days later 24th of June Supreme Court stayed the order and said okay fine we'll talk about it later one day after Supreme Court's decision Jayaprakash Narayan went to Ramlila Maidan and organized a mass protest against Indira Gandhi and wanted Indira Gandhi to give her resignation and Jayaprakash Narayan also announced that there will be a nationwide satyagraha for her resignation in the entire country she also asked the army imagine the army and the police and the government employees not to obey illegal and immoral orders this was groundbreaking Jayaprakash Narayan he actually asked the entire nation to go on to do satyagraha for resignation of Indira Gandhi and also urged all the government employees police and army to join the protest and not obey the illegal and I quote the illegal and immoral orders this actually would bring all the government activities to a standstill the political mood of the country had turned against Congress everyone was against Congress what would the government do then the response of the government was very blunt the response of the government was to declare a state of emergency on 25th June 1975 जिस दिन सत्याग्रह करने बैठेगा बोला जयप्रकाश नारायण went to Ramlila Maidan and went on a satyagraha asked the entire country to do satyagraha and he also organized a mass rally there same day only the government got insecure very much insecure and they declared what emergency इतना आसान है क्या emergency दे देना किसी पर it looked like doesn't it look like Indira Gandhi was doing it or the Congress was doing it for their safety there was actually no emergency the people were using a democratic power don't you feel that people were using their democratic power freedom of speech using Mahatma Gandhi's way of protesting no violence at all but still if emergency is declared for that doesn't it show the insecurity of the Congress party or Indira Gandhi at that point on 25th of June 1975 the government declared that there was a threat of internal disturbances and therefore it invoked article 352 कौन सा article याद रखना which article 352 which actually gives the power to impose emergency under the provision of this article the government could declare a state emergency on grounds of external threat or a threat of internal disturbance external threat to terrorism वगैरह fine for that it can be understood that emergency can be given but internal disturbances के लिए दिया what internal disturbances people were protesting against the government so what is there to give emergency even today you can see a lot of protests going against the current government it's a kind of trend whenever a government comes उसको criticize किया जाता है that is absolutely normal in a democratic country but for that giving an emergency is something not acceptable the government decided that a grave crisis has arisen technically speaking this was within the power of the government for our constitution provides for special power to the government once an emergency is declared. Emergency देने का पहला कारण क्या था? It gives special power to the government. All your rights are suspended. You become powerless, and more power is given to the government in times of emergency. And therefore, they gave emergency in order to stop all the protesters all over the country. Once an emergency is proclaimed, the federal distribution of power remains practically suspended. मतलब नो फेडरल, फेडरल का मतलब एक स्टेट के पास पावर रहता है, एक सेंट्रल के पास पावर रहता है. फेडरल पावर छीन लिया जाना मतलब स्टेट्स के पास कोई पावर नहीं होना. कंप्लीटली पावर रेस्ट्स इन द हैंड ऑफ होम? द सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट. सेकेंडली, पहला क्या होता है इमरजेंसी का इफेक्ट? नो फेडरल पावर, नो स्टेट पावर मीन्स डायरेक्ट ऑल पावर टू सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट. Secondly, the government also gets the power to curtail or restrict all or any of the fundamental rights. अगर गवर्नमेंट चाहे तो आपका सारा का सारा इमरजेंसी जो भी फंडामेंटल राइट्स है, इट कैन सस्पेंड इट. ये गवर्नमेंट के ऊपर बात है और जनरली वो करते ही ऐसा. फ्रॉम द वर्डिंग ऑफ द प्रोविजन ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इट इज क्लियर दैट एन इमरजेंसी इज सीन एज एन एक्स्ट्रा ऑर्डिनरी कंडीशन. अगर आप कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन पढ़ो, इफ यू स्टडी द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन यू अंडरस्टैंड वट एवर प्रोविजंस आर गिवन रिगार्डिंग कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन इट इज प्रूव्ड. अगर आप पढ़ो आपको पता लग जाएगा ये तो बहुत ही खतरनाक सिचुएशन होने पे दिया जाता है. इमरजेंसी इज गिवन ओनली व्हेन द सिचुएशन गोज आउट ऑफ कंट्रोल, व्हेन थिंग्स गो आउट ऑफ कंट्रोल, तभी जाके इमरजेंसी दिया जाता है. बट डू यू थिंक व्हाट वाज हैपनिंग इन इंडिया वाज अ इमरजेंसी? No, I तो don't think, and many experts or scholars also did not think. This was actually an emergency against self insecurity of a political party. On the night of 25th June 1975, उसी रात जिस रात उन लोगों ने दिन में जयप्रकाश नारायण जी गए थे रामलीला मैदान, वहाँ पर उन लोगों ने धरना किया था और उसी दिन सुबह को कांग्रेस पार्टी gave emergency. And on that night 1970 the prime minister recommended imposition emergency to President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed. He issued the proclamation immediately, and after midnight the electricity to all major newspaper offices were disconnected. सुबह उन्होंने ये घटना किया, रात को उन्होंने इमरजेंसी दे दिया और रातों रात को 12-1 बजे they cut the electricity of all the newspaper offices. Imagine, जितने भी, तब का दिन में तो व्हाट्सएप नहीं था, फेसबुक नहीं था, दैट यू कैन गेट, देयर वाज नो टेली न्यूज़ चैनल्स, पोर्टल कोई नहीं था. अभी जो आता है ना, बहुत बड़े सारे न्यूज़ चैनल्स आए हैं, दे गिव यू न्यूज़ ऑन योर मोबाइल फोन, बिकम्स वेरी ईजियर. लोकल न्यूज़ जैसे पब्लिक प्रेस हो गया और भी बहुत सारे न्यूज़ 100 हो गया, देर आर मेनी सच न्यूज़ चैनल्स. तो दिस वॉज नॉट अवेलेबल एट दैट पॉइंट. ना ही वहाँ पे फेसबुक था, ना ही यूट्यूब था, ना इंटरनेट था, ना स्मार्टफोन था. सो व्हाट द ओनली मोड ऑफ गेटिंग न्यूज़ वॉज न्यूज़पेपर. बच्चा एक हाथ में लेके निकल जाता, दिखता है ना टीवी में, आज की ताज़ा खबर, आज की ताज़ा खबर बोल बोल के. सो दैट वाज द ओनली मोड ऑफ गेटिंग एनी न्यूज़. और थोड़ा बहुत रेडियो था. तो व्हाट दे डिड वाज दे डायरेक्टली कट द पावर. मेन जिसके थ्रू से सारा इंफॉर्मेशन जाता है पब्लिक के पास, दे कट द पावर ऑफ न्यूज़पेपर एजेंसीज. देन व्हाट हैपेंड? In the early morning next day, a large number of leaders and workers of opposition parties were arrested. अपना opposition में, उसका opposition में जो भी खड़ा था, जो भी धरना कर रहा था, उनका opposition party, political party जो भी था, the main leaders were put inside the bar, and अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी was one of them. उनको भी डाला गया था कारागार में. The cabinet was informed about it at a special meeting at 6 AM on 26 June. After all this had taken place, सब कुछ हो जाने के बाद जयप्रकाश नारायण जी रामलीला मैदान गए, उसको देख के वो लोग इतना इनसिक्योर हो गए, सत्याग्रह करेगा पूरा देश. दे गेव एन इमरजेंसी एट नाइट आफ्टर कंसल्टिंग द प्रेसिडेंट हु वाज फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद एट दैट पॉइंट. फखरुद्दीन अली अहमद के साथ कंसल्ट करके दे गेव एन इमरजेंसी. इमरजेंसी देने के बाद मिडनाइट 12 o'clock दे कट ऑल द पावर ऑफ न्यूज़पेपर एजेंसीज. पावर कट कर दिया वहाँ पे. अर्ली मॉर्निंग ऑल द लीडर्स वेयर, अर्ली मॉर्निंग मतलब 3-4-5 बजे दे अरेस्टेड ऑल द political leaders. They are as if they were doing certain bad things or they were promoting violence. ऐसा गलत चीज़ बोल के उन लोगों को जेल में डाल दिया. And 6 AM the cabinet was informed. After everything was said and done, सब कुछ होने के बाद सुबह के 6 बजे 26 तारीख को, अगले दिन 26 तारीख 6 बजे they informed the cabinet after everything happened. What happened after that? What were the consequences of this? What were the consequences? Agitation all over the country. People were angry. Everything was stopped. Strikes were banned. No strike. Strike करेगा पिटाई होगा. Many leaders were put into jail, as I said. Newspapers were asked to get prior approval for all the material to be published. Now the newspaper agencies had to take prior permission of all the of the government in order to गिव एनी न्यूज़. न्यूज़पेपर में कोई आर्टिकल छापने से पहले गवर्नमेंट का परमिशन लेना पड़ेगा. ये किस टाइप का रिपोर्टिंग हो जाएगा, जर्नलिज्म होगा. Journalists are actually considered as the fourth pillar of our constitution, our democratic constitution. उसको अगर आप लोग दबाने का कोशिश करेगा, then this is not correct. This was known as press censorship. क्या बोला जाता है इसको? प्रेस सेंसर मतलब तो आपको समझ में आता है, टीट टीट करता है जब गाली देते हैं कहीं पे, फिर उसको बंद ब्लर कर दिया जाता है, उसको बोलते हैं सेंसर करना. सो दिस स्टॉपिंग द न्यूज़पेपर एजेंसीज फ्रॉम डूइंग देयर वर्क वाज एक्चुअली नोन एज प्रेस सेंसरशिप. द गवर्नमेंट बैंड आरएसएस, राष्ट्रीय स्वयंसेवक संघ, और जमायते इस्लामी, इन दोनों को बैंड कर दिया गया देश में. एक को बताया था कि वो हिंदुत्व फैला रहा है, दूसरा को बताया था कि वो इस्लाम फैला रहे हैं. दोनों को बैंड करा दिया, आरएसएस एंड जमाते इस्लामी. Protests and strikes and public agitations were also disallowed. Most importantly, under the provision of emergency, the various fundamental rights of citizens stood suspended. ये तो मैंने बताई था पहले. All your rights are what? Suspended. Except 20 and 21 में जो लिखा हुआ है उसको छोड़ के. The government made extensive use of preventive detention under the provision. Preventive detention मतलब in order to prevent you from doing anything wrong, they detain you or put you inside jail. This is called preventive detention. ये generally कब करता है? जब गवर्नमेंट को लगे that you are going to do something wrong, therefore but they have no proof about it. In order to prevent you from doing that, they put you in jail or any room or keep you as they keep you detained. This is called preventive detention. As it is said, under this provision, people are arrested and detained not because they have committed any offense, but on the apprehension that they may commit any offense. Imagine, आपने कोई offense नहीं किया, just because they think, the government feels that you might commit any offense. आप offense किया कर सकता है, इसका कोई chances है, इसीलिए आपको जेल में डाल दिया. सोच लो. That means you cannot speak a word against the government. If you say a single word, they will detain you. Preventive detention. आप कुछ कर भी नहीं सकता है, इमरजेंसी में लोग के पास पावर है. Arrested political workers could not challenge their arrest through habeas corpus. याद है habeas corpus? Remember habeas corpus? Unlawful detention. पता था ना? Constitutional remedies पढ़ा था लास्ट ईयर. तो उसमें से एक क्या था? habeas corpus. habeas corpus में क्या था? Unlawful detention करने से हम लोग उसके बारे में फाइल कर सकते हैं एक पिटिशन. ये पिटिशन फाइल नहीं होगा बिकॉज ड्यूरिंग इमरजेंसी इवन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल रेमेडी इज ऑल्सो सस्पेंडेड. ये भी तो एक राइट था, राइट टू कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल रेमेडी. ये भी राइट सस्पेंडेड है. तो आप लोग अगर जेल में डाल दिया, यू कैन नॉट फाइल फॉर एनी बेल. Many cases were filed in the High Court and Supreme Court by and on behalf of arrested people, but the government claimed that it is and the grounds of their arrest. It was not necessary to inform the arrested person of the reason of the ground of their arrest. बहुत सारा cases फाइल हुआ था in Supreme Court as well as in the High Court that what was the reason for their detention. कोई तो reason होगा detain करने का. ये reason बताओ. Okay, detain fine, but government said that they don't think that it was necessary to inform the people the reason for their arrest. सोचो, it became kind of तानाशाही dictatorship. Several high courts gave judgment that even after the declaration of emergency, the court could entertain a writ of habeas corpus filed by a person challenging his or her detention. In April 1976, imagine 1976 का अप्रैल पहुंच गया, 1975 का जून महीना में दे गेव इमरजेंसी एंड अप्रैल 1976 में जा रहे. कोरोना से इतना डर नहीं लगता था जितना तो इमरजेंसी से लगना चाहिए, है ना. कोरोना के 3-4 महीने हुआ ही है. एंड लुक एट आवर कंडीशन. इमेजिन आवर कंट्री फेस्ड वर्स देन दिस फॉर मोर देन 1 year. इन अप्रैल 1976 the constitution bench of Supreme Court overruled High Court and accepted the government's plea. It meant that during emergency the government could take away the citizens' right to life and liberty. क्योंकि जज कौन बैठा हुआ था, जजमेंट तो देगा ही ना गवर्नमेंट के फेवर में, क्योंकि जज कौन बैठा हुआ था पता ही. आई टोल्ड यू लास्ट क्लास, इफ यू सी द लास्ट क्लास, देयर वाज अ कंट्रोवर्सी रिगार्डिंग द इलेक्शन ऑफ द चीफ जस्टिस ऑफ इंडिया. मिस्टर रॉय को ले आया था डिस्पाइट देयर वेर मोर सीनियर पीपल. द जजमेंट क्लोज द डोर ऑफ जुडिशरी. कानून का दरवाजा भी बंद हो गया. एंड दिस डिसीजन वाज एक्चुअली कंसिडर्ड एज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट कंट्रोवर्शियल जजमेंट ऑफ द सुप्रीम कोर्ट. आज तक का हिस्ट्री में दिस वाज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट कंट्रोवर्शियल जजमेंट ऑफ द सुप्रीम कोर्ट. कौन सा जजमेंट? दैट द गवर्नमेंट could take away citizens' right to life and liberty. Imagine, government can. The Supreme Court ने क्या बोला था? क्या जजमेंट दिया? That during emergency the government can take away what? The citizens' right to life. Imagine, right to life, जिंदगी का ऊपर जो आपको right है, हक है, right to life and right to liberty also. And this actually it was considered as one of the most controversial judgment in the history of Supreme Court. There were many acts of dissent and resistance to the emergency. Many political workers who were not arrested in the first wave went underground. उन लोगों को पहला बारी में अगर पकड़ नहीं सके वो लोग अंडरग्राउंड हो गया. अगर अंडरग्राउंड नहीं होगा तो खत्म ना, वो लोग को फिर से अरेस्ट कर लेगा. न्यूज़पेपर्स लाइक इंडियन एक्सप्रेस एंड स्टेट्समैन protested against censorship by leaving blank spaces where news items had been censored. बिकॉज वो लोग को सेंसर कर दिया था. वो लोग प्रोटेस्ट के हिसाब से क्या किया, स्टेट्समैन और इंडियन एक्सप्रेस नाम का जो न्यूज़पेपर एजेंसी है, हेडलाइन ब्लैंक, कुछ भी नहीं लिखा. दे वर ऑल्सो प्रोटेस्टिंग कि सब कुछ तो बैन ही कर दिया, हम लोग लिखेगा क्या, तो इसलिए हेडलाइन भी ब्लैंक. मैगजीन्स लाइक द सेमिनार एंड द मेन स्ट्रीम चोज टू क्लोज डाउन रादर देन सबमिट टू सेंसरशिप. उन लोगों ने बोला हम लोग देगा ही नहीं, छापेगा ही नहीं मैगजीन. आप लोगों को सेंसरशिप वाला मैगजीन छापने से बेहतर है कि हम छापेगा ही नहीं. If any journalist wrote anything against emergency, they were arrested. Many underground newsletters and leaflets were published by bypassing censorship. Kannada writer Shivarama Karnath awarded with Padma Bhushan and Hindi writer Fanishwarnath Renu awarded with Padma Shri returned their award वापसी. वो लोग उन लोग को जो दिया गया था पद्म भूषण, पद्मश्री, ये अवार्डीज लोग अपना अवार्ड भी घुमा दिया, क्योंकि ये तो डेमोक्रेसी का डेथ हो गया. आप जिस तरीके से इमरजेंसी दिया, बाय एंड लार्ज एंड थ्रू such open acts of defiance and resistance were rare. Entire country was protesting against them. Parliament also brought many changes. An amendment was made declaring that the election of prime minister, president and vice president could not be challenged in the court. याद है थोड़ा देर पहले बोला था, Allahabad court did what? Allahabad court someone challenged the validity of election of Indira Gandhi, and Allahabad court said that yes, it was invalid. तो अभी ये लोग पार्लियामेंट में जाकर नया रूल बना दिया दैट प्राइम मिनिस्टर, प्रेसिडेंट एंड वाइस प्रेसिडेंट, इन तीन का जो भी इलेक्शन होगा इसके अंदर कोई चैलेंज नहीं कर सकेगा. नो, इट कैन नॉट बी चैलेंज इन द कोर्ट. आप कोर्ट में केस फाइल नहीं कर सकता है. द 42nd amendment was also passed during the emergency. You have already studied that this amendment consists of series of changes. We studied in the last class also. The change was not only for the emergency period but was intended to be of permanent nature. Besides this, during an emergency election can be postponed by 1 year. Thus, effectively, after 1971, elections needed to be held only in 1978 instead of 1976. Now, this was actually about the emergency that was declared by Indira Gandhi. ज़्यादा नहीं समझना है, बस इतना ही समझो कि इंदिरा गांधी emergency दिया, the Indira Gandhi government along with consultation with the president Mohammad Farooquddin Ahmed. But what happened after emergency, I told you about emergency, and we talked about the controversies of emergency. In the next class we will be studying about the controversies regarding emergency. कि emergency को लेके क्या क्या controversies हुआ पूरा country में, what happened in the entire country and what were the controversies, कौन कौन protest किया और इसको लेके क्या controversy हुआ. We'll learn from that and then we'll learn about other things. So I hope you understood the class. Do leave a feedback. We'll be meeting in the next class. Thank you.